uh, with our class here, and we're going to talk about a few things, but we're going to go ahead and start with a prayer. So if you have a chance, please bow your head as we go to our Father in prayer. Dear Father, thank you for this day that you've given us. We're so grateful that the sun is out and that there's warmth out there, but also in here. God, there's so many great things that you continue to bless us with, and we're just so thankful. Thank you for all that are here, some faces that are familiar in our back, and we're so grateful to see those. God, we just ask you continue to bless each and every one. We ask as we study from your word today that you will continue to bring us into a greater understanding of who you are, but also a greater understanding of the evidence for you. God, you have communicated to us so clearly, and we have but to understand it and to receive it. And we just ask that our hearts be open and that we continue to strive to do just that, understand who you are and your will for us in our lives. God, thank you for your love that was manifested through Jesus Christ and all that he has done for us. We're so grateful that he was willing to die that death so that we could have eternal life with you. What a great blessing, God, and thank you for being willing to send him so that his blood would cover our sins and we could have that relationship with you. God, we just thank you for every great thing that you do for us. This is our prayer in Christ's name. Amen. Okay, we talked last week about how we got the Bible, and it was a good study. I think there was a lot of really good discussion, and sometimes that can be a little bit controversial, and so we got through that, and so that's good. But now we're going to launch off into another study that can also be controversial. Maybe not as controversial for Christians per se, but there are some, I think, that might consider this controversial, and let me kind of tell you a little bit why. So sometimes we think that there is so much scientific evidence for evolution that somehow we have to make the biblical story of creation and this idea or this theory of evolution, they have to kind of overlap, right? And there are some who have done that or try to do that. But I'm here to tell you that I think that those two ideas are in complete opposition to one another. And so when we try to fit those things together, I think what we're going to see is that they just don't fit together, like pieces of a puzzle that are from different puzzle, and they just don't fit together. And yet, I have taught this class before, and it has been controversial. And where I thought that it might have been a kind of an easy class to teach, there was a lot of debate. So if there's debate, we should get into that. We should really talk about it, right? We should always let our ideas be tested by other ideas because we don't want to be blind to what other people are saying or thinking, even if it's wrong. But you have to understand and intellectually come to grips with people who have other ideas. Try to understand those ideas so you know where they're coming from. Again, when we started this class, we said part of the reason why we're studying this is so that we'll increase our faith, which it should and does, but how then will we take that to the people who do not believe it? And then the people who don't understand, or want to understand a biblical foundation for the earth and for the universe. So we're going to jump into that today. And since it is a Bible class, we're going to talk about a few things that is coming from the Bible about how old the earth is and how we might know that, right? But two things are kind of in opposition, right? The things that you learn in Sunday school and the things that you learn in secular school, right? Those two things might just be a little bit in opposition. And so which one do you trust? And which one are you going to believe and model your life after, right? So we'll talk about it a little bit. How old is the earth? Okay, so here's some scriptures I want us to examine first as we launch off on this idea. And I want to get a few people to read these, a couple of volunteers, or quote them if you know them that well. So who wants Genesis 1:1? Who will take that? It's not hard to find, so. Kayla, you want that? Okay. How about Psalm 33, 6 and 9? No volunteers today? Okay, Brother Don. Okay, Colossians 1:16. I'm going to start picking people. Bob, okay, thank you. Matthew 19:4. All right, Brother Ari. Mark 10:6. Right, Jen, did you have your hand up? Okay, Mark 10:6. 1 Corinthians 15:45. All right, Lynn, take that one. And then finally, Genesis 3:20. He's going to take that one. I'll take that one. It's also not hard to find. Okay, so we're going to learn a little bit here about what the Bible says about creation, okay? If you were talking to an atheist or an evolutionist, what might they say would be the genealogy of man? Well, amino acids formed amoeba, and amoeba formed, whatever, all the way down until you get to man, right? But we know that's not true. But what does the Bible say about the way things are created and what we can learn about what God has done for us? All right, so Genesis 1:1.
In the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth.
Okay, in the beginning, God created the heavens and the earth, right? Okay, so Psalm 33, 6 and 9.
By the word of the Lord, the heavens were made, and all the host of them by the breath of his mouth. For he spoke, and it was done. He commanded, and it stood fast.
Okay, it was by the word that all things were created. Okay, Colossians 1:16.
For by him were all things created that are in heaven and that are in earth, visible and invisible, whether they be thrones or dominions or principalities or powers, all things were created by him and for him.
Okay, by him and for him. Everything was created by him and for him. Okay, Matthew 19:4.
And he answered and said, Have you not read that he who created them from the beginning made them male and female?
Okay, from the beginning they were made male and female. Okay, Mark 10:6.
But from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female.
Okay, and 1 Corinthians 15:45.
So also it is written, the first man, Adam, became a living soul. The last man, Adam, became a living, life-giving spirit.
Okay, the first man, Adam, had a living soul. And then Genesis 3:20, which reads like this. Now the man called his wife's name Eve because she was the mother of all living, of all the living. Okay, so what do we learn from these verses? We see the idea that God created, and we see it was created in the beginning. Okay, so pretty simple idea, right? There was a beginning, there was a start, right? And in the beginning, something was made, right? And it was the earth, okay? It was a fast event, okay? How many days did it take for creation? Okay, and the seventh God rested, right? And then each day, different things were created. We're going to talk more about that over the next couple of weeks, about some theories that some might have on this. He created all things, right? It was not an evolutionary process, okay? And again, we'll get more into this. Males and females have been here since the beginning. Very difficult to procreate without both parts of the species, right? And so Adam and Eve were created, and they were here since the beginning, okay? And Adam was the first male, starting at creation, and the entire lineage of humanity comes through Adam's wife, Eve, right? She is the mother of all living. Okay, now, question for you. simple to understand, okay? But at the same time, why would there be so many other thoughts about where the earth came from and where humanity started? We've talked about motivation in this class before, right? And motivation has a lot to do with these alternative viewpoints. So where might some of these ideas have come from, and why might they have been thought up? Yes.
People with a more analytic type mind find it too simplistic. They want to find more information to add to it somehow.
Yeah. Well, you see that all the time too, right? Oh, that's just too simple. It can't be, right? And then we overcomplicate everything, right? I have a tendency to do that even myself, right? Oh, that can't be it. I remember one time I was in a physics class, and the professor was talking to me, and we were talking about material science. And the professor went up to the wall, and he started pushing on the wall. And he's like, how does the wall know how hard to push back? What are you talking about? But what he was saying was, at some point, right, the force that's applied has to be negated, right? So basically, he was talking about Newton's laws, and we started looking at that, right? But he's like, how does it know how hard to push back, right? It's actually a decent question when you start to think about it, right? But we have a tendency to overcomplicate everything, right? But the Bible description of the beginning is actually very, very simple, right? And so I think that's one reason why people don't accept it, because it's just kind of easy to understand. It can't be that easy, right? He couldn't have just spoke it into existence like the account says. Yes, Brother Lynn.
I think it goes hand in hand with what she just said, but it's miraculous. So, I mean, if you're denying miracles, or not just the simplicity of it, but they'll call it a fable, or something that's, mythical, or something that's just not real, then they're automatically going to toss out this beginning scenario and find something else different themselves.
Yeah, absolutely. And you see that a lot. If you don't want to believe something, then you're going to come up with every possible other way that this could have happened, right? And we've already seen that. We've already seen a couple of quotes here, from several. The idea of special creation is just unacceptable to so many. And so they have said, okay, I want to come up with some alternative, right? And we've quoted a couple before, so I won't go into that. But there's a very strong motivation to say that creation is not right, because if creation is right, then that means I live because God lives, and God's will for me in my life is something I have to pay attention to, and I can't just do whatever I want whenever I want, right? And we've studied this a little bit already, but it gets back to that. And so I want to make sure people remember, and we think about the motivation again, because when we start looking at the science, you have to ask yourself, well, why would people accept this? Okay? Because they don't like the alternative. Okay, yes.
The interesting thing, though, is, like you were saying, it's very simple, but at the same time, if we don't believe in creation, we don't believe what the scripture says about God creating it, then basically we have to throw the whole Bible out.
Yeah.
Because it says that God is not a liar, that Satan is the father of all lies. And if we can't believe that he created the world, then you might as well throw out the rest of the Bible and walk away from your faith. Because you're basically saying that parts of the Bible are true and the rest of the Bible is wrong in regard to creation. You can't, I guess we've talked about this before, you can't cherry pick it. It's not like a buffet where you can choose what you want to believe and then the other things you can toss out. If you don't believe in the creation according to the biblical account, which is true, then you can't trust the rest of the Bible.
Yeah. We can't take a penknife to the things that we don't like and then remove those, right? By the way, Jesus believed it. We'll see where he quoted from it, right? But the biggest issue and what can be controversial is these first few chapters in Genesis. They're just so miraculous. I don't know if I can believe that, right? But the Bible comes as a whole, and we saw that last time. The Bible comes as a whole. So if part of it can't be trusted, then none of it can be trusted, right? Absolutely. Brother Bob.
Yeah, just youngsters in the church, and I'll just kind of lump everything together because there's hard to get numbers just on the Church of Christ, but churches in general, are losing young people by the time they get to college age, and the surveys and polls that they've taken have showed that if you don't believe in the first 10 or so chapters of the Bible, then chances are once you get to college age, you're gone.
Yeah.
So the first 10 chapters of the Bible are very critical
Yeah.
to a person's faith.
Well, absolutely, because what are some of the first things that you learn in Bible school? The story of creation, right? We sing the song, The Days of Creation, right? And from the earliest days, we're taught that. And if you get to a point where you think that the science is not in cohesion, then it kind of challenges you to your very core, right? And you're right, we have a lot of young people who, when they move off to college and they're exposed to all these other ideas, then they start to doubt their faith, right? Which is why we're all in here, right? Which is why we're all in here, because we will continue to pick apart, the pseudoscience of evolution. And over the next couple weeks, we're going to continue to do that. Now, the first thing that we've done to do that is a few weeks ago, we really looked into the math that says that there is no way that DNA could be a random chance event, right? We already looked at the math, it can't happen, right? So if we for a few moments kind of put aside the creation of the universe and just look at life and the life within the universe, okay, it's impossible that it could have self-generated and been out of random chance. We've already seen that. Over the next couple weeks, I'm going to start picking it apart from other scientific viewpoints. Here in just a couple minutes, we're going to look at some astronomy, and we're going to look at all the things that really kind of pick apart naturalism. And over the next few weeks, we're going to just pick it apart from different aspects of known science, right? Because in the end, what we see is evolution is really not science, okay? And so science has to be observable, it has to be testable, and it has to be repeatable, none of which apply to evolution. Did I see another hand? Brother Phil.
It's your penknife comment. A preacher I grew up with, he was studying with a lady trying to teach her about baptism, and so she didn't believe it, so she went and took the penknife and cut all the scriptures
I don't like that.
out of the Bible, and we went back and studied with him, and says, no, my Bible doesn't say that. That does happen.
Yeah, there's a page missing here. Oh, look, I had cut it out because it said something that I didn't want to hear, right? We're all faced with that. There are times when there's stuff in the Bible that we read that means that I have to change my life. And many times I don't want to change. And so, man, that would be great if I just went in there and just took that out, because you know what? Now I'm justified in doing what I'm doing because it no longer says that, right?
I was about 5 years old when I heard him speak on that.
Yeah. Yeah. I've heard also some folks in religious circles, they really don't like the book of James, right? And so they would just love to kind of penknife the entire book of James and get that out of there, right? But James has so many practical things to say to us, right? And we would not know a lot of things about how we should live and the responsibility we have for what we say and how we say it, right? If it weren't for the book of James. Did I see another hand? I thought I saw another hand, yes.
I'm just gonna say, in colleges and schools and so forth, where evolution is taught, there's nobody refuting it at all. So they don't see the other side of what
Yes.
is true about
Yeah.
creation. And that's the sad part.
Yeah, that's a really good point. Most of the time, the assertions go unchallenged, right? Or even if you would like to challenge them, you get called down in the classroom, and that does happen from time to time. So I want to make sure that as we continue to look at a few things here, that we understand that, right? A lot of times there's not a fair playing field, and that's on purpose because of the motivation. I don't want people to think that there's special creation, because if they think that, then they might actually accept the fact that there is a God, and the fact that we need to live according to his will, and the fact that because I say something different, I might be lost, right? That's hard for people to come to grips with. Okay. I'm going to do something I don't normally do here in a few minutes. I'm going to read some things, but I want to continue to kind of pick this kind of apart a little bit here. If you look through a timeline of the Bible and you start looking at lineage and chronology, okay, what do you see and what would you see about the approximate age of the earth? Okay, so I have here on page 121, I couldn't get the visual up there so that it was all readable. So if you have your books, great. If you don't, I'm going to describe it. But on page 121, there is a graph there that kind of shows the timeline of the earth, right? And that timeline is put together by the chronology shown in the Bible. Okay, so from creation, right, Adam was there, and he lived 930 years, right? And what the Bible does, and it does a pretty good job of this, is it says when the father was X number of years old, then the son was born, right? And then we can see that they lived so long. And then when that father was born, then when his first son was born, he was X number of years old. So what is that? That's not only genealogy, that's also chronology, right? Because now you can pick and understand exactly how long from the creation day were different people born. Okay, and there's some interesting things about this chronology that you see. So in general, what we see is from creation to the flood, I think approximately 2,000 years. Let me look at that. Yeah, approximately. So let's put it this way. Instead of talking about the flood, we'll just talk about from Adam to Abraham, okay, about 2,000 years. From Abraham to Christ, about 2,000 years. And from Christ to present, about 2,000 years, okay? So if you look at that, then the earth is probably somewhere between 6,000 and 10,000 years old, right? And when we start looking at that, we have to ask ourselves, what are the implications of that? And what evidences do we have of that, right? And so we'll have to start kind of picking this apart. But the interesting thing is if you look there at page 121, what you see is that if Adam lived, as the Bible account says, which we all believe, 930 years, and he begat Seth, and Seth begat Enosh, and Enosh begat Canaan, and Canaan begat Mahalaleel, and Jared, and Enoch, and Methuselah, and Lamech, right? And then Lamech, Noah. What we see is that with those lengths of life, many of them lived at the same time. Right? Does that make sense? Right? And so you would have had the opportunity, let's say, for Adam to be able to actually speak to Methuselah. So if you had Methuselah lived just up until the flood, and if you look at the timeline here, Adam could have and probably, well, may have, depending upon where they lived, talked to Methuselah. That means that basically there's only two people that need to pass on the story. Unlike today, where we live basically, 75 years or so. And then if we're going to pass that on, it's got to be passed on multiple times. But all the way up to the flood, right, if Adam had told Methuselah, hey, this is what happened at creation, guess what? That's a first-hand account. That's pretty amazing, actually, when you start thinking about it, right? Okay, so then after the flood, what you see is that those who were born after the flood are Arphaxad, Selah, Eber, Peleg, and then all of the descendants from there. You see them start to live shorter and shorter lives. And then what you see then is, what you see there on 121 is that a lot of them actually died around the same time. So things really started to change in terms of the passing on of history. Okay, and then that's where we start to get to a point where, critics and skeptics will continue to say, well, there are gaps in this chronology, right? There are gaps in this chronology. Okay. So what we see here is the genealogies do more than just give us who begat who. They also give us a timeline of the earth, okay? And the critics say that there are gaps in these genealogies, but there are no credible gaps. So, and I'll let you guys read some of the testimonies and some of the quotes here in the chapter about that. But there are no credible gaps. So what you see is that this is a very accurate representation of who begat who, basically from the creation down through Christ. Okay, so there's no credible claims. And even if there were, there wouldn't be millions of years worth of gap. Okay? Adam lived a long time, but he didn't live that long. Okay. All right, so what I want to do is I want to pull over and pause there for a minute and then kind of talk about this just a minute, and then I want to launch off in a different direction. Okay, I'm going to break something here because I want to read some things to you. But again, my intention here is to completely debunk evolutionary thought. And we're going to do that from multiple sciences. We have already looked at the science of DNA and understand that that can't be. And so we're going to do it from different perspectives. And we're going to start here from astronomy. But before we do that, I do want to let you guys have a chance to talk about this just for a minute. So what questions or comments do you have about that? I'm missing a page here. What's that?
I think even Jude, in the book of Jude, it mentions, is it Enoch? Enoch being the seventh from Adam.
Yeah.
So you get a very detailed account there that there's no gaps.
Yeah. Yeah, and even if there weren't in the Old Testament one mentioned, any gap that may have been is actually mentioned in the New Testament. So when they say that there are gaps, the gaps are filled in within the Scripture, and so it's pretty easy to see that the claims that there are gaps are not credible. So, good point. Yes.
I don't know if you're gonna get into this, I'm sure you probably will, but I know that some people think that there are millions of years of gaps in regard to the creation. They don't believe that what it says day one, that
Next
it was a literal 24-hour day. They think
Yep.
that it could be millions of years. So I know that some people think that millions of years could be placed within that, just the first few days of creation. So I don't know if we're gonna go into that.
Not today, but within the next week or two, yes. We'll talk about the day-age theory. We'll talk about the gap theory. We're going to go into many of the long-age theories and talk about, why they have been presented and then what the problems are with them. So we will do that, but just not this week. Okay. Any other questions, comments? Yes, Brother Lynn.
I was just going to say that just like with everything else in the world, it seems like genealogies are very important to history and science, just not the Bible's genealogies.
Yeah.
We will trust man's genealogies all day long. They will trace them and say, well, this says this to here, and from Alexander the Great to here, and they'll look back through history and the scope of genealogies and say, well, there's absolutely, that has to be true. But the minute they read it in the Bible, they say that that's not true.
Just dismiss that. Yeah, that's 100% true. You know, I will say this. When I read the genealogy in the Bible, I'm like, I'm never going to remember all these names, so I have a tendency to just kind of skip over them. All right, and this one begot this one, and this one begot. I'm like, I can read every other name and still understand who did what. So when I'm reading, I do that. I just jump ahead. I'm not going to remember them all, right? Why are they there? Well, this is why they're there, right? This is great evidence, right? And through God's wisdom, he gives us the way not only to trace families, but to trace time itself. It's fantastic, right? God's wisdom continues to astound us in so many different ways. Yes?
You have the count of Matthew and Luke too, that
Yeah.
doesn't contradict anything. So, they were passed down, brought down, known by all the Jews.
Yeah.
So it was a big deal for them.
It it was a really big deal for them, right? Because they wanted to know who had inheritance where, and who was related to who for that reason, and who was a legitimate priest, and all the rest of it. There were definitely reasons for that, right? But the byproduct of that is we've got a lot of great evidence for timelines, right? Which is awesome. So, okay, so I'm gonna switch gears here, and I'm gonna go to some astronomy. Okay, and again, over the next couple of weeks, we're going to look at different pieces of science that will continue to debunk anything that evolution might have to say. Okay, so the first one, I have 3 different articles here I want to read, and each one of them really kind of point to some things that are really important for us to understand. So the first is about the planet Mercury. Mercury, one of the 9 known planets of our solar system, is the closest to the sun. It is also one of the smallest. Only Pluto is smaller. Even Ganymede, which is a moon of Jupiter, and Titan, which is a moon of Saturn, are bigger. Yet tiny Mercury has a lot to say about the origins of our solar system. Mercury is a planet of extremes. The side of the planet that faces the sun reaches a temperature of about 430 degrees Celsius. That's hot. While the dark side is a frigid minus 170 degrees Celsius. Mercury revolves around the sun every 88 days and has an unusual characteristic of rotating on its axis exactly 3 times for every 2 complete orbits. Much of our information about Mercury comes from Mariner 10 flyby of 1974-75. Lacking the variety and color of some other planets, Mercury's rocky, cratered surface resembles the moon's. But what is really interesting about Mercury are the things that can't be seen. Scientists have discovered that Mercury has the highest density of all the known planets, other than Earth. Mercury is so dense that it's thought to have an iron core occupying some 75% of its diameter. That means the core is like really huge compared to its overall size. This extraordinary density has created much turmoil and confusion in evolutionary astronomy. Evolutionists mostly agree on models of planetary formation, but their models say Mercury can't be anywhere near as dense as it actually is. After decades of struggle, most astrophysicists today have given up and admitted that Mercury's high density cannot be accommodated within slow and gradual development models. Okay, so one of the key ideas of evolution is this idea of uniformitarianism, okay? And if you look at the word itself, kind of tells you a little bit about what it is, right? Everything has from the beginning been, or from their beginning, has continued with the same processes slowly over time. Uniformly, things have changed, but they change slow and gradually, right? Which is why they need millions and billions of years for the universe to have existed, because all these changes would have had to have been slow over time, right? So this idea is uniformitarianism. Okay? So instead, the preferred explanation now is that billions of years ago, a large object crashed into Mercury, stripping away its lesser dense material and leaving behind the high-density planet seen today. Consider the implications of this. Evolutionists have admitted that the planet that we see today cannot be explained by gradual evolutionary processes, right? So Mercury itself says, nope, evolution is not true, okay? This is a stunning admission. Instead, they propose a long ago catastrophic collision. What is the evidence for this collision? Only that Mercury would otherwise disprove evolution. Over and over again in astronomy, cosmic collisions are invoked as sort of a magic wand to rescue evolutionary theories from the facts. The planet Uranus is tilted over, but evolution says it can't be. Therefore, long ago, something hit it and knocked it over. Venus's rotation contradicts evolutionary predictions. Therefore, long ago, something hit it and spun it around the opposite way. Mars' atmosphere is too thin for the evolutionist taste. Therefore, it used to be thicker. But long ago, something hit Mars and stripped most of it away. Mercury is too dense for evolution. Therefore, long ago, something hit it and conveniently removed the lighter parts. Do you see a pattern? Evolutionists wave their collision wand at will and yet mock as unscientific the Christian belief in a one-off catastrophic global flood, despite the abundant physical and historical evidence for it. Mercury's challenges to naturalism are not limited to its density. Evolutionists received another rude jolt when Mercury's magnetic field was discovered. To understand why this poses a problem, we must discuss evolutionary ideas of planetary magnetism. Most solar system planets have significant magnetic fields. Where do these fields come from? Evolutionists, and those who might hold to the long-age creation model, hold to a dynamo theory, which requires those planets with magnetic fields to have molten metal cores. Through a complicated series of events, fluid motions inside the core can supposedly generate a magnetic field. Evolutionists believe this idea because it's the only mechanism that they have been able to propose by which planets supposedly billions of years old could still have a magnetic field. All other mechanisms would require that the planets be very young. Unfortunately for the long-agers, the more we discover about other planets, the more we find that the dynamo model cannot be true for them. This shouldn't really surprise us, however, since many long-agers admit that even the Earth itself poses many huge problems for the dynamo model, and the Earth is the planet that the model was first invented to explain. Back to Mercury. To be billions of years old and still have a magnetic field, there must be fluid motions within a planet's core. Therefore, the core itself must be molten. But as one evolutionist says, Mercury is so small that the general opinion is that the planet should have frozen solid eons ago. Therefore, the core cannot be molten, and so evolutionary theories would have to conclude that Mercury cannot have a magnetic field, but it does. Some evolutionists speculate that perhaps Mercury's core isn't iron, but iron sulfide instead. But in solving the problem for Mercury, a much bigger problem is created. A fundamental principle of the solar nebula theory, which is used to explain how our solar system formed, is that there cannot be any volatile element such as sulfur this close to the sun, and so there shouldn't be any iron sulfide in Mercury. Thus, in trying to rescue a billions of years age for Mercury, evolutionists are undermining the very foundation of their ideas about the formation of the entire solar system. Creationists have no problem explaining the magnetic field of Mercury, nor of that of any other planet. There are several ways in which a young, approximately 6,000-year-old planet could still have a magnetic field. But since evolutionists reject a young creation, they cannot explain planetary magnetism. One evolutionist says, magnetism is almost as much of a puzzle now as it was when William Gilbert, who died in 1603, wrote his classic text concerning magnetism, magnetic bodies, and the great magnet Earth. When a Christian examines the solar system, it is easy to wonder if the Creator designed the planet specifically to confound non-creationary explanations of them. Repeatedly, new discoveries contradict naturalistic ideas. Ironically enough, in the case of Mercury, even evolutionists admit to this after a fashion. They admit that any attempt to include Mercury in their evolutionary models will doom the models to failure. They say that Mercury is a trap that has seduced evolutionists and has a fatal attraction for solar system modelers. So we see that this tiny, seemingly insignificant planet creates enormous stumbling blocks for those who wish to deny the Creator. Truly, God has chosen the foolish things of the world to confound the wise, and God has chosen the weak things of the world to confound the things which are mighty. Okay, so almost every planet in our solar system, all the ones that we know and that we have sent, probes to go and look at, when we discover them, almost all of them do not fit the model that evolutionists say that they should. Right? Mercury being one of the biggest, right? And so when you start thinking about science and you start looking at this, and I'm directing this to the young people, right? When you go into class and they start saying, well, this is the way these things come about, right? There's a ton of evidence. There's a lot of places where we can go and study this and give them back solid evidence that the models that evolutionists say should be true are not at all, right? And I love the comment here about a magic wand of these collisions, because basically every planet in the solar system had to have been hit sometime in order to fit this model of evolution, okay? So you can see how inconsistent this is. All right, so I'm going to pause there. I have another 2 articles to read. Maybe I'll just read one of them. But thoughts?
Canyons on Mars that are much, much deeper than Grand Canyon, and they proposed that there was a flood on Mars, which doesn't have water, which we have in abundance here on Earth. So they invoke a theory for Mars, which they deny here on Earth, and how we got the Grand Canyon.
Yeah. Yeah, very ironic, right? Yeah, it seems as though their story changes based upon the new evidence found, right? Which I will say intellectually is kind of how science works anyway, right? As you find something, you always revise your model. So if we're going to be intellectually fair about the whole thing, that's kind of how science would work anyway, right? And so you would try to get a model that would actually explain something. But in the end, you can see where this is as much faith on their end as it is ours, because there are no evidence for these collisions, and yet we just, wave the wand, okay? No, something hit it, and that's why it's like that. Something hit it, something hit it, something hit it, right? And, at some point you lose your credibility, right? Okay, other comments?
This might be a little off base, and if you're gonna touch on this, I couldn't tell in the book, it didn't look like we were gonna touch on it, but if we are, just go ahead and stop me. But one thing that's always helped me when we go down the Big Bang route with friends of mine that are atheists or evolutionaries, that you cannot create life from no life. And still to this day, they cannot create life from no life. Even when they're cloning things, they're taking it from life. There, at some point, would have had to been a situation occur where life was created from no life. And that obviously could not happen. It can't be recreated, and it's never happened again.
Yeah.
So that's always a good point that I start with people, that are of the evolutionary mindset.
Yeah. And many of them are like, well, but life was seeded from, an alien species. They invoke this to try to say that. Well, then where did they come from, right? Yeah. Right. Yeah. There's this idea of infinite regression, right? And you'll always have to ask, well, where did that come from, right? In the end, it has to be God. So, yeah. Really good. Let me read this last one here, and then we'll probably be done here. So I love this because the more we know, the more it points back to there is a God. Okay, so this is written by Brian Thomas. He's an astronomer, and it's called "The Planet's Reverse Orbit: A New Twist in Old Evolutionary Story." Okay, the Wide Area Search for Planets, the WASP project, has discovered a planet that orbits backwards against the rotational direction of its star. Methodological naturalists think collisions or near collisions are the causes of unusual cosmic phenomena like this. Same thing. Okay, but this reverse orbit observation adds to a growing list of astronomical features that should not exist if collisions and other random physical processes are all that could have caused them. The planet named WASP-17, the 17th planet identified by the WASP astronomers at the Geneva Observatory, they were looking for a faint periodic blinks that occur when planets or planet-like objects pass in front of stars when they are discovered that this planet was orbiting in the wrong way. The vast majority of planets and satellites, including all of those in the solar system, orbit in the same direction as the stars they rotate, right? So you have the sun, right? If the sun's rotating, then all the planets rotate in the same direction, okay? And we see that in all the different planetary formations. They could think of no better explanation than a near collision may have created the retrograde orbit. Not only is the likelihood of this happening remarkably slim, but it conflicts with the anti-supermaterialistic but popular conception of planetary origins known as the nebular hypothesis. This proposes that planets form spontaneously from spinning dust rings, which clumped and condensed near to newly formed stars. The resulting planets ought to therefore continue orbiting in the same direction as that of the rotating dust and debris found around the stars. Okay, so conservation of momentum would say that if the dust was there and it was rotating this way, and then it clumped together to form this planet, then they would continue to rotate in the same direction, right? And so that's a law. Okay, but WASP-17 doesn't. Assuming for the moment that the nebular hypothesis is true, how exactly could a mere collision have reversed WASP 17's direction? At approximately 159 Earth masses, the planet would have required a tremendous outside force to slow its orbit, then reverse it, all without tearing the planet apart or bumping it from its vicinity of its neighboring star. Such a feat would have required septillions of newtons of force applied carefully enough to keep the planet from being destroyed. The chances of a flyby mass or some kind of having performed this powerful yet precise operation are vanishingly small. So basically what it's saying is you can't have something hit it, because if it would have hit it, it would have destroyed it, because it would have required that much force, right? So the two things cannot be true. MIT astrophysicist Sari Seeger told Space.com, "There's always theory, but there's nothing like an observation to really prove it. But when it comes to the nebular hypothesis theory, there's actually nothing like an observation of a phenomenon like WASP 17's reverse orbit to really disprove it." Okay? So they invoke all these, hey, this collision happened here or whatever else. Then they see this WASP 17, which basically breaks all of the rules. And it also says that a collision could not have done that. Right? I know, that's a little heady. But at the same time, what it says is God created the universe. Just like he said in the Bible. And the evidence proves it. Right? And we can believe it, and that's okay to believe it, and you're not scientifically ignorant if you don't believe it. Right? It's right, and it's good, and you can believe it. All right, and so class, I'll take a quick comment, and then we got a lot of people standing in the foyer.
So one of the things that just occurred to me, you made that comment about throwing things in there just to confound people, which I think is absolutely possible, and I hope it's absolutely true. But one of the things that I find coolest is we keep finding things further out.
Yeah.
And further out, and further out. So is he still putting things out there just to keep them going?
Here's something for you to think about. I love it. All right, thank you for your attention and your participation in class today.